President Trump is calling his latest executive order ending vagrancy and restoring order. It will prioritize funding for cities and states that move the homeless into treatment centers and commit those who are at a risk to themselves or others. NBC4's Macy Jenkins live in downtown LA for us with reaction to this. Macy.
Hi, Carolyn. Well, overall, this would make it easier for cities and states to remove homeless people from the streets. President Trump saying this new approach is part of his effort to protect public safety. Now, this order titled Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Streets says in part, shifting homelessness individuals into long-term institutional settings for humane treatment through the appropriate use of civil commitment will restore public order. Surrendering our cities and citizens to disorder and fear is neither compassionate to the homeless nor other citizens. The president now directing several federal agencies, including Health and Human Services, HUD, and the Department of Transportation, to assess their grant programs and give funding priority to states and cities that prioritize the following: enforcing prohibitions on open drug use, urban camping and loitering, and urban squatting. The order comes after the Supreme Court ruled last month that unhoused people can be arrested and fined for sleeping in public spaces. That decision overturned a lower court ruling that deemed the practice cruel and unusual punishment. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom's office released this statement today saying last year the governor issued an executive order addressing encampments that was based on the law and facts, not harmful stereotypes and ineffective public policy. Like so many of Trump's executive orders, this order is more focused on creating distracting headlines and settling old scores and producing any positive impact. But his imitation, even poorly executed, is the highest form of flattery. Now, we reached out to the LA Homeless Services Authority, or LAHSA. A representative said they are currently reviewing the order to see what kind of impact it would have on homeless services here in LA, the city, and the county. Reporting live in downtown Los Angeles, Macy Jenkins, NBC4 News.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. The title of our show today is The New Gulag, and one of the central points will relate to the news story that you just saw. And before I get going, my normal reaction to something like that would frankly be, great, it's about time. But one of the things we'll be discussing today is how the deep state perspective helps us see a dialectic in place: problem, reaction, solution, and to connect a few dots of the significance of where this is going, given all the other events in the world today. So I want to catch up with you a little bit on some of the stories that we're going to be discussing, in addition to the new Gulag and the significance of this being an executive agreement coming out at this time. So I want to kind of catch up a little bit and remind people, we do 3 shows a week on locals. Links are in the description. It's $5 a month to become part of this community, share with different posts, be able to have access to the videos, being able to truly be a part of a community, and even contact me if you'd like to do that. So on Friday, we have a show called Memory Hole Friday. We had 2 guests this week, and we discussed the 1951 book, Iron Curtain Over America. And what we do is we collect the totality of all these memory hold stories and tell you what exactly is the cosmic conspiracy that's unwinding before our eyes today. And why has it been memory hold? Why is it significant for us right now to know this information? And in addition to this story, great guy, KC, out there in Tampa, Epiphany Parish, sent me this book, Water Flowing Eastward. I couldn't help but kind of chip parts of this into the story this week. Fascinating book. We were talking a week ago about the protocols, and this book, the subtitle is The Authentication of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. and how this fits into just about every other piece of memory hold material of significance, pulling together the cosmic conspiracy and why it's so essential for us to understand, to make sense of this story and all the other stories and bring those together. So that was our show on Friday. Again, links in the description. This Friday coming up, we had a great Memory Hole Monday, last Monday. This one, we're going to be looking at a book from D.C. Schindler. He's part of the avant-garde metaphysicians within Catholicism that really problematize the modern liberal state. And I want to speak to that for just a moment, because we're at a point that many of us are, quote unquote, waking up, seeing how the dialectic works, seeing a grand conspiracy unfolding before us, which is always going to come back to things like data, Internet of Bodies, transhumanism. Why are all these points coming together? How do they converge in secular history and redemption history to where we're at right now in what I would argue is the great deception? And features should be downloading anytime. I did an interview with the Brazilian friends, and the topic of that show was the Zohar and the Jewish utopia. How do this vision for the new world, how does technological singularity and indeed the encampment of the homeless or mentally ill figure into this long-term eugenics project? So we're going to be talking about that this coming Monday in relation to the book Freedom from Reality. And in addition to that, we did a show on Wednesday called Connect the Dots. And this is just one of the segments. I'm pulling together dataism. That's Yuval Harari's religion, that we're nothing but data. It happens to, correspond with a new film that came out, War of the Worlds, where it's kind of externalized that there's an alien force and you're just data. The merging, because Yuval Harari's and the World Economic Forum have externalized this. You are a hackable animal. You're nothing but data for our harvesting. How does this fit into these new data centers being assembled right now in Texas? How does this connect with the Neuro net and the Neuro lace and this internet of everything that's coming about? And invariably, some of the points we talked about is this does start to sound something like a mark of the beast situation, where that all information is putting together for us. In addition to the surveillance state, there's a type of economic capture. You can't buy or sell, and it's all taking place in the subset of a great deception. And most people are, as they did 5 years ago, going to continue to go along to get along. They don't want to kind of go against the current. And that's part of why we're doing this, is so we understand that the cosmic conspiracy, the necessary piece is understanding the enmity and the desire of the synagogue to destroy the church, the minds, bodies, will of Christians in order to build up an alternative system. It's crushing the kingdom of Christ so that the kingdom of Antichrist can submerge. And it's so important that we don't want to get entangled in this deception. So one of the critical pieces that I connected to Trump's executive order that seems to be sort of a one-off over there is this idea of data. And it's all the parts are coming together under this theme of encampment. So what I want to do right now is really just focus on one article in particular. So, before I get going on that, I'm going to connect a couple other points that it's hard to kind of not get when we're talking about what could be pernicious underneath this executive order to take people that are mentally ill, and because there's a precedent in history for this. Okay, great precedent. So what could be the precedent? Well, going along with that, just recently we have the idea, Kennedy said within the next few years he'd like to see everybody wearing technology on them. And that's part of this digital health initiative. So along with all of the tech giants, and in particular here, we have to focus on Palantir because it's the one dot that connects to all other dots, this mass worldwide surveillance system. And yes, it's hooked into the Middle East. It's hooked into BRICS, including China. It is there. Their infrastructure is present. And so that's very significant. And again, Kennedy's wearable devices, these are all prototypes bringing us into this internet of bodies, the internet of everything, very mark of the beast kind of stuff. So when we hear one particular story like the camps, it's so easy to say, get them off the street. I'll be frank, I'm not a bleeding heart kind of guy. That would be my initial result. But think about the idea that the problem was created for this exact solution as I'm reading the story for today that I've selected. In addition to this story, we have other crazy things, including the idea that certain states will be rejected from FEMA relief if they don't give aid to guess who. So people that are increasingly, we're seeing the earthquakes, and even some of this relief is connected to HARP. HARP is supposed to be the technology that can possibly create these things. So these new natural disasters are displacing people. And we're finding if you don't give allegiance to certain people, or that if you notice things happening, you might not or don't want to participate. So in addition to that, we have the trade wars that are being ramped up and elevated. So the economic costs of that could possibly create dislocation. A lot of things can start to get interconnected as you think about it. And I'm only beginning with all of the stories going on this week, one of which was from the Capitol. I know this is an American story, but there's many interconnections with other similar acts going on throughout parliaments throughout the world. But in the United States, we have something that's part of our republic's check and balance system, which is called Article 1, Section 9 and 10, which includes fundamental ideas like habeas corpus. Where are you moving bodies? Very fundamental. Go back in common and natural law way before the inception of the United States. Just disappeared. And Article 1, Section 10, which includes this decisionalism by Trump with all these other radical executive orders. And yes, they'd be radical under any administration. They're very extra constitutional at best. But I'm saying there's a incremental decisionalism, a high level of decisionalism from the executive that's not being put in check. We're about to hit that in just a moment. So it just disappeared. There was some pushback on this and it sort of reappeared. The same thing with the FEMA relief. It sort of disappeared. It's kind of in limbo right now. But all of these stories are connected. Unfortunately, I'd like to especially tap into the idea of data and weird data as we think about the encampment. But this isn't so much a story about the connecting the dots. Several people contacted me and said, you need to put this story on YouTube. So I want to focus just on this executive order dealing with taking homeless or people deemed unsafe to themselves or society or deemed mentally unfit and making them institutionalized indefinitely. I do want to begin by the opening sentence in the book, Seeing Through the Singularity. And it begins with this idea dealing with biopolitics. So I just want to describe again, that's what I've done here on this entire site. Biopolitics is a fringe subdiscipline within political science that I have a focus on. I believe it's the single most relevant part of contemporary academic political science that really truly speaks to what's going on in the world today. Yes, It's a little bit heady. It's a little bit critical theory, but it really is apt to speaking to what's going on right now with all of the things, but in particular, this notion of putting people in a camp. So I began with a phrase from the book of Revelation, or the book of the Apocalypse. We have one mind and shall give our power and strength over unto the beast. And that's this idea that the Tower of Babel is coming full circle. It's the idea of what is the point of the Internet of Bodies, of the Internet of Things, having us merge with inanimate things, making us less human and giving our essence into the material. It's part of an ancient project. Like, what is it all about? One of the features here has to do with the control of our minds, bodies, and spirits. Part of our theology is that our spirit and body are interconnected. That's why we believe in a bodily resurrection. It's very significant because when we think about the new Antichrist Talmudic order, it needs to eliminate that concept in the body and minds of people. So it's extremely significant concept. But to put all things into one, and that's the direction of all secret societies, but one secret society in particular. So this is a phrase that I began the book with, which is my assessment of the whole book in one chunk. Biopolitics is ultimately about the physical, mental, and spiritual control of the human population. Technological singularity functions within an enduring matrix of control. It strives for the inversion of the cosmic order through the inversion of logos. That is, it strives toward the creation of one mind that will reverse engineer creation. So they need us, we are electric. They want us to connect our data with data centers like a giant battery. And I know it sounds crazy until you think about connecting the dots. That is exactly what's going on. And it includes the beginning of this is wearing a device, a wearable device to check your health. That's one of the fundamental ideas about the idea of biopolitics. Whatever they're going to do to enslave and encamp you, it's going to be done for your safety and for your mental health. And ultimately, they're going to say for the mental and physical health of the body politique. So that's been their program. And of course, we saw that 5 years ago and Saving Grandma, as if these eugenicists care about your grandmother. So that is one of the fundamental ideas that we will be dealing with here. Let me read you just a little bit more about the biopolitics. Biopolitics, the term, denotes the politics of life. Again, think everything is an inversion that ultimately seeks to have ultimate physical, mental, and spiritual control over the human population through largely covert means and practices. Michael Foucault says, biopolitics is the study of life, which is neither the basis nor the object of politics. Instead, it presents a border to politics, one that is natural, but also artificial and transformable. And that's just a little entryway in our typical kingdom of Christ theology. We work with non-contradictions. This is politics of the enemy, biopolitics, where a thing can both be and not be. Straight from the Zohar, the Kabbalah, and it's that system of thought that's going to introduce a new level of totalitarianism. When you think about 1984 and the mind control, it's always subduing you through contradictions. And when you just give up and become servile to these requests, that is the form of a mental camp that they're creating. And so that is a fundamental idea of tyranny and totalitarian governments, is to subject you to these kind of contradictions. So I want to read just a little bit more before I continue here. And this subtitle is from the book, In Pursuit of the Metaverse. Both books, again, will be in the description section. And I want to read just a little bit more about biopolitics. This one is from the Italian thinker, still alive, Giorgio Agamben, extending some of Foucault's thoughts from the 1970s into our contemporary situation. This particular blurb comes from the 1990s, and he even makes light of this into the COVID era. So for Giorgio Agamben offers a critical analysis of modern democracy and sets its relationship with totalitarianism within the context of biopolitics and the empire of spectacle. He argues that contemporary democracy has become decadent and has gradually aligned itself with totalitarian states, blurring the boundaries between them. Now, if I were reading that to you in the 1990s, you're going, what are you, a crazy liberal? Is this some kind of French critical theory? What are you talking about? Think about that. The American empire, if you want to call it that, is right now, think of what the tax dollars are paying for. Let's start out with just the simple stuff. Bombing over 100 churches in the last decade. Tax dollars, permission, nobody's noticing. A church, suddenly somebody decided to notice after 100 churches. Genocide. There's nothing. A regime that seems to have complete control of this empire through its parliament, through its special interests. You get where I'm going with this. That's increasingly not even allowing other ethnicities or religious ideas when it purports to be some kind of democracy of the Middle East. It's becoming clear it's a totalitarian regime, ethno-centered cult that controls our government. So it should really resonate that these biopolitical thinkers that were talking about this in the 1970s and the 1990s, this became very manifest throughout the last 5 years, and especially the last 2 years, that whatever they're grappling on, and what Giorgio Agamben is telling us here, in the very seed of these constitutional republics that we call democracies, totalitarianism was put in there. It was more obvious in the French Revolution, but it's blossoming right now before our eyes, that totalitarian seed, and that's what he's arguing here. So Agamben points to the fundamental paradox at the heart of modern democracies. He suggests that the emphasis on the value of life, that's how they're doing these camps. That's how they got this death shot into people, this operating system that, yes, will connect with the frequencies and the Internet of Bodies. It's all connected through the value of life that's based on the emphasis of life, which has become the primary concern of politics, has led to the erosion of other values. And this is significant for what we're about to read in our article today, and the convergence between democracy and its supposed enemies. He argues that the totalitarian regimes of Nazi fascism, which elevated decisionalism, bare life to the highest principles, continue to persist in these forms. So when I'm talking about this executive order, you have to remember, in America, it was set up so laws come out of our Congress, our parliament, so to speak. So our lawmakers, Congress, makes the laws, the executive implements them. That's the system. It's been turned on its head. We call this decisionalism. And that's what he's saying. When you see decisionalism, totalitarianism is the next step. And you say, is he just getting things excited here, so forth? This has been recognized since the ancients. oligarchs, democracies, and aristocracies come and go in ebbs. When democracy taps down, the next step is totalitarianism. That's what he's talking about with biopolitics and recognizing these signs. So Agamben continues. According to Agamben, the concept of decisionalism, which I think these piles of executive orders indicate, where the power to make life and death decisions is concentrated central to the political paradigm. He suggests that there is a continuity or an interconnectedness between mass democracy and the totalitarian state. And I want to say that again. It's hard for people to get this. When it's clear that democracy around the world is corrupt and people are disenchanted with it, the next step is some form of totalitarianism. It's very real. So he's talking about the connection. And we've never wanted to hear this. In America, we put up I teach this. You put up the textbook with the flag and the eagle, and you say, freedom, freedom, freedom. We're not ready for this. We are not ready for this language. And that's why when you hear a story like they're finally cleaning the streets of LA, great. And we're ready to give our consent over. There is a darker side to what's going on here. So he's looking at the connection between mass democracy and totalitarian states, and that the concentration camp serves as the hidden model for the political project operating within what I call the empire of spectacle. So I'm going to drop out for 10 seconds here, and I will return, and we're going to continue. So now what I'm about to read to you is an article entitled The New Gulag. And this author will get us thinking about the potential implications of this executive order. The author I'm about to read from, his name is John W. Whitehead. He's a constitutional attorney and author. He is the president of the Rutherford Institute. His most recent books are the best-selling Battlefield America, The War on the Political People, and the award-winning A Government of Wolves, The Emerging American Police State. Let me repeat that. The Emerging American Police State, and the debut of a dystopian fiction novel, The Eric Blair Diaries. Much of what I concentrated on this book were people that looked into the totalitarian nature of both the communist and the Nazi regimes. Leo Strauss, a writer in the 1950s out of the University of Chicago, Hannah Arendt, who I'm about to say a blurb about, Eric Voegelin, again, heavy on Eric Voegelin in here, Juice Malou, all had great reflections on what is the fundamental seed and telos, direction of the idea of encampment, and how does it fit into this totalitarian scheme of things within broader politics. So here's a quote from Hannah Arendt that he begins the story with. There are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is a dangerous activity. And when we see all the signs and the type of censorship that we're getting around us right now, that should cause great pause for us right now. So I'll begin with the article. And the article is entitled, The New Gulag, Mental Health Detentions and the Criminalization of Dissent. And before I can even get going, the criminalization of dissent. Think about stories over noticing things, noticing the breaking of international law can be subject to deportation, now potentially encampment. We're talking about potentially all of these laws coming about that want to criminalize the noticing. And increasingly, there are proposals throughout parliaments of the world and in America over the last 2 years that want to criminalize parts of our New Testament scripture that are essential to what the message of Christianity is. These are very alarming things that if there's no pushback, they will proceed. They will proceed. So it's very, very, very interesting times that we're living in. So the government's war, before I continue on that, yes. So that should cause like this kind of information that we're talking about being criminalized. And the idea is essentially that anti-Semitism, it's on the verge. This is what they're pushing for before I even get into the story. They want to call anti-Semitism a mental disease. You're thinking, wow, that's far out. How can you predict that? Because the pattern in place has already happened before. They've done it in Russia, first law under the Bolshevik regime, and they did it in Germany after World War II. Now, some of those have disappeared and some of them have reappeared, but there's precedent in totalitarian regimes to make this as a foundational decree. So from the noticing to making too many strong references to the history of Scripture or the tradition of Scripture that recognizes the enmity between the church and the synagogue, that will increasingly be problematized, censored, and ultimately deemed a mental illness. So it's easy when you first hear it, get them off the streets of LA, but you have to see the pattern at play here. So the government's war on homelessness, much like its war on terrorism, its war on drugs, its war on illegal immigration, and its war on COVID-19 is yet another Trojan horse. It's a foot in the door. First, President Trump issues an executive order empowering federal agencies to clear out homeless encampments and lock up the homeless in mental institutions, using involuntary civil commitment laws intended for dealing with individuals experiencing mental health crisis. Days later, a gunman allegedly suffering from a mental illness opens fire in New York City, killing 4 people before turning the gun on himself. How convenient. And there's all kinds of, you have to go to BitChute and Rumble to get those stories that do the breakdown of that. Coming on the heels of President Trump's executive order aimed at ending crime and disorder in American streets, the shooting has all the markings of a modern-day Reichstag fire, a tragedy weaponized to justify allowing government's use of mental illness as a pretext for locking more people up without due process. Let me repeat that, locking them up without due process. And the way that there was so little pushback when they tried this out, taking people that were here under any status and putting them in these El Salvadorian institutions, is just a precursor to what's going to keep on coming. But if there's an awareness and a pushback that there's a larger agenda, we need to know about this. So people out there that say, what do you want me to do? These are the kind of things that you need to be aware of to see where this is going. And, you know, the convenient event that comes along with it to precipitate an action without due process, fundamentally unconstitutional. Those are the things you have to be pushing back for all the people that say, you don't want me to vote for Trump. What do you want me to do? This is the time to come to life. An Orwellian exercise in doublespeak. Trump's executive order suggests that jailing the homeless rather than providing them with affordable housing is a compassionate solution to homelessness. According to USA Today, social workers, medical experts, and mental health service providers say the president's approach will, quote, likely worsen homelessness across the country, particularly because Trump's order contains no new funding for mental health or drug treatment. Additionally, they say the president's appeal to misunderstand the foundational driver of homelessness is that people can't afford housing. Think about they're going to keep coming, all these disasters, and some people aren't going to be able to get aid. With the new trade agreements with BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard buying up all the property and rinky-dinking with all your mortgages, there's going to be more and more displaced people. And once you have this established as a precedent, it gets very dangerous. So again, when you see it happening, focused the initial story on the squalor in Los Angeles, it's easy to say good and fall into a left-right thing. Crazy Newstead over there. It's time somebody comes up and fixes that situation. And what we argue here, it's part of a problem, reaction, solution. And this story connects to the biopolitical agenda. And what I've always argued and what I've connected on this site and in this, the biopolitics agenda is one and the same with the Kabbalistic agenda. It's the control of body, minds, and spirits to bring on a new age. And then comes the kicker. Trump wants to see more use of civil commitments, i.e. forced detentions for anyone who is perceived as posing a risk to themselves or the public, or are living on the streets and cannot care for themselves in appropriate facilities for appropriate periods of time. This vague language is quite totalitarian. Some kind of facility for some X amount of period of time. And then comes, translation. The government wants to use homelessness as a pretext for indefinitely locking people up anywhere who might pose a threat to its chokehold on state police power. When you consider the ramifications of giving American police state that kind of authority to preemptively neutralize a potential threat, you'll understand why some might view those looming mental health roundups with trepidation. By directing police to carry out forced detentions on individuals based not on criminal behavior, but on perceived mental instability or drug use, the Trump administration is attempting to sidestep fundamental constitutional protections, due process, probable cause, and the presumption of innocence by substituting medical discretion for legal standards. I can't imagine a more important story that you could be hearing right now. These are the hallmarks of an impending totalitarian regime that's going to move with one fell swoop the next level of this. But if people start to push back, there could be change. It's very necessary to identify this right now. That taken to its authoritarian limits, this could allow governments to weaponize the label of mental illness as a means of exiling dissidents who refuse to march in lockstep with its decrees. Police in cities like New York have already been empowered to forcibly detain individuals for psychiatric evaluations based on vague subjective criteria, having firmly held beliefs not congruent with cultural ideas, exhibiting excessive fears, or refusing voluntary treatments. And for anybody locked into the left or right, good. When another regime comes in, it can flip the other way once we have these precedents. So somebody in the future, and where it's going to go, you have family values, you believe in a nuclear family, you must be mentally ill. You think that the family should take precedence over the state control, you must have a mental illness. This can go anywhere. The foot in the door is going to be, it's going to begin with something that most people will agree with, tied together with a Reichstag fire event. And it's not going to stop until there's significant pushback. What happens when these criteria are expanded to encompass anyone who challenges the police state's narrative? Once the government is allowed to control the narrative over who is deemed mentally unfit, mental health could become yet another pretext for pathologizing dissent in order to disarm, silence government critics. And I don't want to break the flow of the article, but that's a continuous theme you find among eugenics projects. The Soviet Union was a eugenics project. Nazism was a eugenics project. It's the idea that we have to purify the body politique. And when I talk about books like the precursor to the Vatican II meeting, Jules Isaac would write books in the 1940s and 50s that were a precedent for the agenda in Vatican II. And he would say that constantly. We need to purify Christianity. We have to blur the enmity between the church and the synagogue. We have to blur the Christian understanding of the deicide and the collective empowerment from that killing of the king, and how without pushing back, understanding, speaking it, that it will just continue to kill the kingdom of Christ as it has existed politically, socially, culturally, and still exists in the hearts and minds of believers. Take heed, this is the potential to become the next phase of the government's war on thought, crimes, cloaked in the guise of public health and safety. According to the Associated Press, federal agencies have been exploring how to incorporate identifiable pattern data into surveillance toolkits, including behavioral health records. This is where the wearables, the NeuroLace, pre-crime units, Minority Report, predictive crime, this is all connected to this. And this is where we get truly into 1984. And the ultimate takeaway of 1984, they're going to use cleansing the body politic, making you safe for yourself and for politics as the ultimate end game, which, according to 1984, will be the feeling of having a boot on your head into eternity. So thus, this author is making that point. The government, the infrastructure is already in place to proliferate and detain individuals based on perceived psychological risks. The government is actively exploring how to use data from the wearable health devices, this is my words, that Kennedy is pushing because, of course, he loves us. He's one of the good guys, including heart rates, stress responses, and sleep patterns to flag individuals for intervention. Let me say it again. Health rates, stress, sleep patterns to flag individuals for intervention. Now imagine a future in which your Fitbit or Apple Watch triggers a mental health alert, resulting in your forced removal for your own safety. Mass surveillance combined with artificial intelligence powered programs that can track people to their biometric and behavioral health sensor data, tracked by wearable devices monitored by the government and agencies such as HARP. And I don't even want to go there. An agency allegedly that can create and manipulate weather, earthquakes, allegedly is connected to your wearable devices. I don't even want to begin going there right now, but we see the interconnection of all things. And this is getting pretty obvious right now. But the one thing that's especially the centralizing feature of all of this is Palantir, who of course has all his dirty connections to Vice President Vance. Tracked wearable devices with government agencies such as HARP, threat assessments, behavioral sensing warnings, pre-crime initiatives, red flag gun laws, mental health first aid programs aimed at training gatekeepers to identify who might pose a threat to public safety, and government access to behavioral health records could pave the way for a regime of the police state and authoritarianism through preemptive mental health detentions. If the police state has equipped itself to monitor, flag, and detain anyone it deems mentally unfit without criminal charges or trial, this could be the tipping point in the government's effort to penalize those who engage in so-called thought crimes. And I want to mention at this point, the final chapter of In Pursuit of the Metaverse is called When Christ Becomes Hate Speech, because Christ will become considered something believed by the mentally ill. And propounding the fullness of it, there might be a kosher version floating about in the anti-church, but the true traditional understanding will be criminalized. And if that seems far-fetched, look at some of the proposals that want to strip anything deemed anti-Semitic from sacred scripture. And it came pretty close to passing last time around in the United States. And it's even more advanced in some other parts of the world right now. Throughout the history, from the Cold War era Soviet gulags to modern pre-crime initiatives, authoritarian regimes have used psychiatric labels to isolate, discredit, and eliminate dissent. As historian Anne Applebaum notes, administrative exile, which requires no trial and due process, quote, was an ideal punishment not only for troublemakers as such, but for political opponents of the regime. So we've seen this tactic before when governments seek to suppress dissent without provoking outrage. They turn to psychiatric labels. So they want to silence you. They want to remove you. The way to do it is to do it through they care about your life. They care about your safety. They're going to do it under that biopolitical pretext. The word gulag refers to a labor or concentration camp where prisoners, oftentimes political prisoners, or so-called enemies of the state, real or imagined, were imprisoned as punishment for their crimes against the state. Soviet dissidents were often declared mentally ill, institutionalized in prisons disguised as psychiatric hospitals, and subjected to forced medication and psychological torture. Totalitarian regimes use such tactics to isolate political dissent from the rest of society, discredit their ideas, and break them physically and mentally. And I haven't even began talking about the Noahide piece of this. And that's, of course, the idea that belief in the fullness of the Christian belief system, the Trinity, bodily resurrection, and so forth, will be charged. People will be charged as idolaters, and that will also have a prelude as being a mental disorder, inconsistent not only with the regime, but with the prevailing thoughts going on in society. So it's going to be dangerous to the body politic. In addition to declaring political distance, mentally unsound government officials in the Cold War Soviet era also made use of administrative processes for dealing with individuals who were considered a bad influence on others or troublemakers. George Kennan described a process in which the obnoxious person may not be guilty of any crime, but if, in the opinion of the local authorities, his presence in a particular place is prejudicial to public order or incompatible with public tranquility, he may be arrested without warrant, may be held from 2 weeks to 2 years in prison, and may be then removed by force to taken to a place within the limits of the empire, and there be put under the police surveillance of a period from 1 to 10 years. I'm probably not going to get to the entirety of the story. I think we're starting to get the idea. One thing I see coming out are the heirs of Russia, which are, I have argued, and it's really clear in this writing right now, that together, what synthesized right about the time of Our Lady's message was the concept of Zionism and communism that would make the perfect dialectic for world control, the perfect left-right dialectic coming together as an alchemical, magical scheme over the minds of people. And I think that that's coming to play right here. We get the worst aspects of both of those. And what are they designed to do? World domination. And so under that totalitarian pretext, and remember that when we always hear about one government, there are no alternative viewpoints that are tolerable. They will be deemed a mental illness under the Antichrist system. The empire, and there will be put under police surveillance for a period of 1 to 10 years. Warrantless seizures, surveillance, indefinite detention, isolation, etc. Sound familiar? What's unfolding in America is the modern police state's version of that same script. Civil commitments, laws are found in all states and empowered throughout history. So before I continue, part of the heirs of Russia was to induce in people a false messianism, to get people to grab on in any means necessary to the Jewish utopia. What is that? Taking the heavenly ideas of perfection, of God's utopian vision, and putting them in the earthly, in the future. And so what do we hear that's going to protect us from this? AI is going to come as our savior to these kind of problems. And we see it being promoted all around us. It'll be able to solve all of the world's problems. This is part of the great deception. This is part of the merger of man and machine. It's going to be man and data to solve all of the world's problems. So the false messianism is when we look for love in all of the wrong places. So there's going to be earthly solutions that we need to be aware of. And the best thing I would argue we can do back is that we do have to work with the present political system as is, that does preserve to some extent still our life, liberty, and property, and hold on to what we have. And to recognize something that is greatly against natural law and that is fundamentally unjust. We've had a chance to speak out for a lot of the last few years on events that should be appalling to us. This has been a test for us. Do we want to speak out? This is how history rhymes. They came for the gypsy. I wasn't a gypsy. They came for the sodomite. I wasn't a sodomite. They came for the folks on the streets in Los Angeles. And I thought, well, I wasn't one of them. So there's a reason these are coming around, and we have to start connecting dots and seeing the big picture. There's an agenda in place. There is a cosmic conspiracy happening. And what do I mean by that? There's a conspiracy of the synagogue against the church. There is a conspiracy against God and man and Christ and his church. So the way we fight this is getting back to the fundamentals of what built Christian civilization. Those same fundamentals will preserve Christian civilization, and those same fundamentals can, I believe, continue to preserve our life, liberty, family, or property. So we need just to be alert and not get sucked in to the left, right, problem, reaction, solution. It's once you pull, we've seen it happen over the last 5 years, and nobody likes to call out because you don't want to be that uncool person that looks at the event like the convenient bang bang that happened that corresponded with this. But we have to start getting our game on in terms of if you want to preserve your life, liberty, and happiness. I know most influencers don't want to be that person, but if nothing else, if you don't want to point it out, just look for something that's fundamentally unjust, against natural law, against international human rights, and speak out. Then start connecting the gypsy and the sodomite and their fates that are done without due process, that it is part of a pattern. That's the whole point of this article. When fused, these doctrines give the enormous discretion to preemptively lock people up based on speculative future threats. I'd like to skip down a little bit here. We've already seen what happens when dissidents are pathologized and criminalized and civil commitment laws are weaponized. For example, Russ Tice, a NSA whistleblower, was labeled mentally unbalanced after attempting to testify in Congress about the NSA's warrantless wiretapping program. Adrian Schoolcraft, an NYPD officer who exposed police corruption and was forcibly committed to a mental health facility in retaliation. Brandon Raoub, a Marine who posed controversial political views on Facebook, was arrested and detained in a psychiatric ward under Virginia's mental health laws. The article continues, but I think we have the general idea. So I wanted to put that out there as something we can be aware of, obviously, and look for other similar situations that should alert us to something that's potentially problematic in terms of building a surveillance police state in particular. Because the way Kabbalah works is they put this out there, and just like the fact that they put the kibosh on Article 1, Section 9 and 10, and it just disappeared from the federal website. When people gave it pushback, it reappeared. With the FEMA, when people gave some pushback, it might be in play, it might not be in play. So it matters to be alert and to speak out. Fundamentally, the sign that this is happening is decisionalism. These executive agreements that are end running around our legislative process are part of a program to bring in a police state and a surveillance system. So if people are still lost in the Trump deception, it's just a good time to start speaking out. It begins by identifying the general direction here. And obviously, when you see that story of those people in LA, it is so easy to get caught up in that. And I'll just say briefly, I lived in New York City half my life, but during a time when Giuliani came in and cleaned the streets, it doesn't have to be a terrible thing every time. But in this occasion, it's connected with something that's very vague in terms of the length of institutionalization, the terms and the reasons for the institutionalization that can be opened up, that match a pattern that was the institutionalization of people with the two regimes of the 20th century. So both of those, the Nazi regime and the communist regime, are pulling together right now into a new collectivist system the Italian theorist Itzioni would call communitarianism, which is a subtle, sneaky version of both, but the end game is the same. It's preparing body, minds, and spirits for a new type of spiritual and political order. And so let's hold on to what we have, would be my final advice for this. And once again, if people are interested, we have a show coming up on Monday that's going to put some of these parts together and hook them on to some of the great Catholic metaphysicians that are going to say we need to start understanding some problems with what we call liberal democracy, because it's rooted to something called monopoly capitalism, which has an agenda. And so for people that still get caught in that, what are you, a communist? What are you, a socialist? We're people that are trying to hold on to as many facets of Christ is King worldview, which is that ultimately any authentic ontological power that exists comes from above. And that this power from below, we need to start being suspicious about the direction and the agenda and the telos from what and the techniques of preserving a body politics that alleges to be of the people, and that really the agenda begins to sound more like it's for your own good and it's for the purification of the body politique. And so we're going to continue to hear that kind of biopolitical language to justify the police surveillance state that's slowly being implemented around us. In terms of the AI component, it's not being implemented slowly. It's coming at us at exponentially faster rates, and the ability to cast a great deception, given the digitalization of everything that we sort of visually consume. So we have to really be discerning in terms of understanding where this direction is going. And I think I got the point there. So I put the links for our locals page. I'm going to continue to develop these stories in our coming weeks. This Friday, we have a show coming up that is going to tap into the Jewish Utopia 1932. It's a book by Michael Higger, but there's another book that took extractions of that so that we can visualize what's going on, and that's called The Ultimate Utopia. So it's taking all those misplaced categories from this new world order that really help us understand why the AI, why the Internet of Bodies, why the singularity fits into this ultimate utopia. So we're going to be unpacking that this coming Friday. There's going to be another episode of Connect the Dots on Wednesday, and we're going to have Metaverse Monday that's going to have the freedom from reality so we can better understand these concepts. So I hope everybody is doing well. This has been Dr. Deep State, and thank you for listening.